Wow, that's diabolical.
This sounds very familiar.
Jagmeet Singh must be feeling pretty proud of himself after the sales tax bill passed in the House yesterday. Now imagine his surprise when he woke up this morning to see what the next Conservative non-confidence motion had in store for him and the NDP.
Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Exhibit A. Mr. Pierre posted this on his Twitter today, and it says, Common Sense Conservative Motion. Whereas the leader of the New Democratic Party said he, quote unquote, ripped up his supply and confidence agreement with the Liberal government.
We have been very clear. I've ripped up the supply and confidence agreement with Justin Trudeau. We decided to rip up the agreement. I've ripped up the agreement. Because I ripped up the agreement, we have ripped up the agreement. Well, we've ripped up the agreement. We have absolutely ripped up the agreement. We have ripped up this agreement. We've ripped up the agreement with Justin Trudeau.
Whereas the NDP leader said, quote, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people, end quote.
The fact is, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people.
Whereas the NDP leader said, quote, the Liberal government will always cave to corporate greed.
Justin Trudeau has proven again and again, he will always cave to corporate greed.
And always step in to make sure the unions have no power, end quote. In response to the Liberal Labour Minister's referrals to the Canadian Industrial Relations Board that ordered the workers of Teamsters Canada Rail Conference and the ILWU 514 to resume their duties, violating their right to strike. Therefore, the House agrees with the NDP leader, and the House proclaims it has lost confidence in the Prime Minister and the government.
Wow, that's diabolical.
This sounds very familiar.
I think I smell a plot, though. If I'm Pierre Poilievre and I'm hearing this, and he says, we're going to vote whether it's confidence or not, their next confidence motion, because you can make a confidence motion about anything. It doesn't have to be about budget. So I think the Conservatives' next confidence motion needs to be about workers' rights.
Labor disputes.
Yes.
Can you imagine that? Imagine the NDP voting against labor rights in a confidence vote. Folks.
It's diabolical, right? Like if I was the Conservatives, that is the motion I would table on my next opposition day. So in this motion, which I believe the Conservatives will be putting forward as a confidence motion next week when they have their opposition day, it sounds like they are citing things that the NDP have said, agreeing with those things, and then putting that forward as non-confidence. So if the NDP votes against it, the NDP is essentially saying, no, we didn't mean all that stuff.
Right. And, we're not going to sit here and say that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives got this idea from Northern Perspective, because they have their own smart people that are thinking up much more interesting things than we are. But I think it is the perfect political play here, because this is essentially Jagmeet's wheelhouse right here. And let's just recall some of the things that he said to the unions themselves.
What we said at the very beginning when we forced the Liberals to move forward on things like dental care, when I forced Justin Trudeau to move forward on pharmacare, we said, if you ever think that you could bring in back to work legislation and call it a confidence vote, we will vote against that every single time. We made it very clear. So they know we will not support any interference, not just back to work legislation, but any interference. If it comes to Parliament, we will be voting against it. We should always negotiate. Particularly the message it sends is that it rewards bad behavior. It rewards an employer if they lock out their workers, if they mistreat their workers, they don't have proper safety, and they say, you know what, we know anyways we'll get the outcome we want because the government will just do it back to work or force arbitration. That's why we have to make a clear line in the sand. Never. We should always negotiate fairly, put pressure on getting a fairly negotiated solution, but never force the workers back. That undermines not just these workers, but in any future conflict, it'll send a message that employers can just disrespect their workers. That's wrong.
So, New Democrats are here to stand in solidarity with these workers. We've got a clear message. We want these workers to be able to negotiate a fair deal. These workers have the right to strike.
That's right.
So our message to the Liberals is stay out of it. Don't interfere, don't force binding arbitration, and certainly do not bring in back to work legislation.
We want to send a message directly to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. Don't interfere with this process.
If they want to make any vote in Parliament that in any way impacts your rights, we're going to vote no. We're going to vote no. We tell that right now. Whether that vote is a confidence vote or not, whether that triggers an election or not, I'm telling Justin Trudeau and the Liberals right now, you're never going to count on us if you're going to take away the rights of workers. Never.
All right. So they force binding arbitration on the rail workers. They force binding arbitration on the port workers. And they can't force binding arbitration on Canada Post. So
Well, they could if they called an emergency motion.
Well, they could legislate them back to work, but
Right.
I don't think they could force binding arbitration on them. So without a vote, so what they can't do with Canada Post is do what Steve McKinnon did for the other two unions.
Because those were lockouts, not strikes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So this is the thing about this, and it is so smart of the Conservatives to just structure it around this. And here's the other beautiful thing: the Bloc is going to be voting with them.
Hopefully.
They will.
I can't see how they wouldn't, but I mean, I've been surprised before.
Well, because the Bloc and the Conservatives are working on this together behind the scenes. They're
Yeah.
like, okay, it's time for the government to fall. What's the best way to do this? So this confidence motion has nothing to do with the carbon tax, has nothing to do with affordability. It is everything to do with what is in the NDP's wheelhouse.
Well, and not only that, it has to do with what the NDP themselves has said, what their leader has said. So if you vote against it as the NDP, you're voting against what your leader said previously. How can you do that?
And this is the problem, right? And this is where we had talked about Jagmeet Singh before, kind of being backed into a corner. Well, now the Conservatives are essentially grabbing him by the shoulders, shoving him in that corner, and nailing him there. So he has been shooting off his mouth about all this stuff. Now the Conservatives are saying, all right, well, all this stuff has happened, and according to you, this has taken away the right for workers to strike. So it's time to put up or shut up, Mr. Jagmeet. Are you going to vote non-confidence, or are you going to show everybody, and I mean everybody, every single supporter, every single union, everything, and this is why Pierre put this out on Twitter, so everyone can see what it's going to look like and what the confidence motion is going to be based on. Everyone will be able to see that you're nothing but a pension sellout leader of the NDP.